Hello, we are inside the greenhouse today. It is very cold outside, and so I could not film this outside. And it's not too much warmer inside this greenhouse, but at least it's not raining inside the greenhouse. It's raining outside. But the rain has to come in order to give everything a drink of water so it can live. And that's like what the Word of God does for us. It gives us water for our souls and our spirits to be able to have faith in God that what He says He's going to do will do, and the way He's going to take care of us, He will also do. So we're still in Ezekiel. Today I think we're going to finish up in Ezekiel. And last week we left with the Lord telling Ezekiel that He was the Lord and that He was going to unify both nations of Israel and Judah together. Remember the sticks? He had him to write Judah in one and on one and Israel on the other and put them together, and He said He was going to unify them as one nation. Then He says, I'm going to give you another message, Ezekiel, and this is for a land called Gog and Magog. Really strange names, G-O-G and M-A-G-O-G. And there's a lot of people that believe that this correlates with the land of Russia and the Scythian lands that are up north of Israel. And this is for a time in the very far future. This is what God tells Ezekiel. But God is going to allow the enemies to gather together and come against Israel. This is going to happen, has not happened in our lifetime yet, but will be happening because Israel will continue to disobey them. He will allow the enemy nations to come against them again. And He says in here that He laid on the hearts of these people to come against His people. But once they attack, and they punish them as much as He wants them punished. They attack and they kill some of them. And then He says He's going to turn the people of Gog and Magog against each other, and their swords will kill each other. And that this will come far, far in the future. But for us, it's not very far in the future and could happen at any day. And He tells Ezekiel to prophesy against Gog and to tell him, when my people are living in peace in their land, then you will come against them from your distant homelands with your cavalry, and you will attack my people Israel, covering their land like a cloud. In that time, in the distant future, I will bring you against my land as everyone watches. And at that time, my holiness will be made known to you, the nations that have not even known about me, because I would have written this in my book so many years in the past. And you will finally know that I am truly God. And He said, you're the one I was talking about long ago. When you read this, you're the one I was talking about long ago, and announced through Israel's prophets that in the future I would bring you against my people. And all living things, the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the animals of the field, they will all quake in terror at your presence. The mountains will be thrown down, and then I will punish you by bringing your people's swords against each other. And I will also send rain and hailstorms and fire and burning sulfur down on you. And I'm going to show my greatness and holiness to you, and I will make myself known to you. He says that the very people that came against Israel to plunder them, that Israel will then plunder those nations, because all those people from all those nations will be dead everywhere. And it says that the Israelites will come and gather up all the plunder, and they will get enough wood just from the swords and the weapons of these people that for 7 years they won't have to look for firewood. And then He says He's going to bring the birds of the air and the animals of the land to come and eat the flesh, off the bones of the people that were left from the nations that were killed. This all sounds pretty gruesome, but this is what God says in his word is going to happen. And then he's going to have the people of Israel to gather up the bones left from the people. And it's going to take 7 months to gather all these bones. He says he's going to make a feast for the birds and the animals, and it will be a sacrificial feast that the Lord would give to them. And he says that he will have mercy on Israel because he guards his holy reputation. And they will accept responsibility for their past shame and unfaithfulness after they come home to live in peace in their own land. And after that, I will bring no one to bother them. I will leave none of my people behind, and I will pour out my spirit upon the people of Israel. So this is a time in the future. It's the Battle of Armageddon, and we've talked about it before, but Ezekiel gives us kind of a different slant on it. He tells us what's going to happen after the battle has taken place. Now, Ezekiel then says that God took him to the land of Israel and set him down on a very high mountain. We studied how Ezra and Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple when the people were brought back from their Babylonian captivity. And they had to have blueprints to build this temple. And Ezekiel is the prophet that gave them the blueprints. I don't know if you know what blueprints are or not, but if any of your parents have had a house built, they had to go to an architect and commission or pay an architect to draw up blueprints for their house. There had to be a plan for the workmen to then follow. And this is exactly what Ezekiel is given. He's given the blueprints for the temple that Ezra and Zerubbabel will build. And Ezekiel says, he saw the city of Jerusalem, and as he came nearer, he saw a man whose face shone like bronze standing beside a gateway entrance. Now, most of the time when he sees someone like this is Jesus before he came into the body of Jesus. This is the pre-incarnate Christ. And he said he was holding in his hand a linen measuring cord and a measuring rod. Remember last week I showed you this ruler and it said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This man had a string of cord and he had a measuring rod. And he is going down to the place that the temple is going to be built. And God is giving Ezekiel very specific dimensions. The gateway is going to be so many measuring rods long, and the entranceway and all of the side chambers that the priests are going to stay in, and the dining rooms that the priests are going to eat sacrifices in. And he gives dimensions of the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard. And he tells about all the gates that are going to be surrounding this temple. And everything is designed in a perfect square. Now, when Solomon built the temple, God had given his father David all the dimensions that David gave to him. And when Moses was in the wilderness, God gave Moses specific dimensions that the tabernacle was supposed to be built, that tent-like temple that was in the wilderness. And both of those were a rectangular shape. But this temple that's being built in Jerusalem by Ezra and Zerubbabel is a perfect square. And so the dimensions had to be followed exactly, very, very precisely for it to be the way that God wanted it to be. I want everyone to look at their fingertips right now. You're going to see a bunch of lines and squiggles and wiggles on your fingerprints. God put those there. When you were inside your mother's tummy, he was making these little lines and squiggles on your fingers. This is a blueprint on your fingertips of you, nobody else but you. And in these lines and squiggles is your destiny. It's who you're going to be, how you're going to be, who you're going to marry, how many children you're going to have. A lot of people call fortune tellers, try to read your palm. They're just guessing. God knew exactly what the blueprint plan was for you, and he knitted it on your fingerprints. And if you want to know what they are, you need to ask God. Don't go to someone who does horoscopes and reads the stars, or someone who tries to be a psychic and tell your future. Just ask God. He's the only one that's going to tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And just as precisely as he gave the plans for that temple, he also put very precise blueprint plans on your fingertips. Your own body follows these blueprints. They tell your lungs when to breathe, your heart when to beat. They even tell you when you need to go to the bathroom. They tell you everything your body needs to do. And unless you do something that changes that plan, your body follows that plan. Sometimes people will have caffeine in coffee or tea or chocolate or soda water, and it makes them speed up everything they're doing. That's not going according to your plan. That's using something outside of you that you've brought inside to change what's going to happen. If you were to drink poison, it would change what would happen on the inside of you. God has a plan for perfect health in your fingertips. And as long as you are following what you're supposed to eat and what you're supposed to do with your body, then you stay healthy. If you were to run outside in freezing weather and stay several hours without a coat on, you're going against that plan. Well, Zerubbabel and Ezra had to go exactly along with the plan that was given. And this blueprint plan was given to Ezekiel. And that's one of the biggest things that Ezekiel does, is he gives the plans for this temple. And like I said, they were very detailed. The altar, everything had to be done exactly the way they were supposed to be done. He also gave instructions to the priest. When they went inside to do their priestly duties, they weren't supposed to wear any wool clothing. They were only supposed to wear linen, because they were not supposed to sweat or perspire when they were in there doing the work for the Lord. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but this is what God said he wanted them to do, and this is what they were supposed to follow. So Ezekiel was given these instructions, and he's the one that gave them to the people, and that's what God told him to do. There was a tribe of Levites called the Zadoks, and even when all the other priests were doing things they weren't supposed to do, that were not following God's order, the Zadok priests did follow the orders. And so in this instruction that Ezekiel was given, he was told that only the Zadok priest could do the priestly functions in this temple. The other priests could do outside work, and they could clean things, but only the Zadok priests could offer up sacrifices and handle the sacrifices, because they had been faithful, and this was how God was rewarding them. Then it says the man brought Ezekiel back around to the east gateway. Now this is very important. There was a north gateway, a south gateway, a western gateway, and an eastern gateway. And when synagogues are built all around the world, they are always built with their entrance facing Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the eastern gateway was supposed to be the gateway that God was going to come through. And that is exactly what happens here. He says, suddenly, the glory of the Lord God of Israel appeared from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the roar of rushing waters, and the whole landscape shone, lighted up with his glory. This vision was just like the others that I had seen by the Kibar River, and then also when God came to destroy Jerusalem. I fell face down on the ground, and the glory of the Lord came into the temple through the east gateway. Then the Spirit brought me up into the inner courtyard, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And I heard someone speaking to me from within the temple, while the man who had been with the measuring rod stood beside me. And the Lord said, Son of man, This is the place of my throne, and the place where I will rest my feet. I will live here forever among the people of Israel. See, God was showing Ezekiel what the temple was going to look like once it was going to be built by Zerubbabel and Ezra. God is also going to inhabit his temple when Jesus reigns, but the glory is never going to leave the temple again. If you'll remember earlier in Ezekiel, he saw the Lord's glory leaving the temple, and then Nebuchadnezzar came in and destroyed it. Well, now Ezra and Zerubbabel are building the temple again, and God's saying that his glory will never again leave the temple. And that was an important thing. God told him that the priests were supposed to make sure that all these rules were being followed, and there would be a prince, not Jesus, but a prince that would be ruling over Israel, not a king, but just a ruler over Israel. And the people were supposed to give tithes and offerings to him, and he was the one that was supposed to provide all the sacrifices for the feast and the festivals that would be held to celebrate God being with them. And there were very special instructions that God gave to that prince. He was supposed to have land set apart for himself. I don't know if you remember or not, but if you were in my children's church, last year we studied how there was a very bad king named Ahab, and he wanted a man's field, and his wife had the man killed so he could get that field. And God said, I'm going to give the princes special lands so that they won't be wanting to take land away from the people, because their job is to take care of the people. So God said that if the prince gave some of these lands to his sons, they could be there and be his son's possession for always. But if he gave some of this land to a servant, at the year of Jubilee, every 50 years, they had a year of Jubilee, and all debts were canceled. If you owed somebody money, it was just wiped away. And any land that had been sold outside of the family would then go back to the family. So he said if any of these lands were given to a servant at the year of Jubilee, they had to go back. We don't have anything like that in our culture. If you make a loan, you have to pay it out all the way to the end. But God wanted to make sure that his people were free of oppression. So he had a lot of rules that they were supposed to follow. The Lord wanted some special land set apart for him, and he wanted the land divided up between the 12 tribes. Remember, Israel and Judah are now going to be in unity, and all these different tribes were to have a portion of the land. And the Lord said that the east gateway of that inner courtyard, the one that he came through, was to be permanently closed until Jesus comes back. He's the only one that's going to be able to enter into that gateway. And he also gave other specific rules that if someone came into the temple from the north gate, they were to exit from the south gate, and vice versa. If they came into the south gate, they were supposed to exit the north gate. Again, I'm not sure what all these rules were for. I'm sure that God will let us know when we get to heaven. But they were rules, and even though the people didn't understand them, or maybe back then in those days they did understand them, it was a different culture back then, but they were to obey them no matter what. Then Ezekiel says that there is a river. It says, in my vision, the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and there I saw a stream flowing east from beneath the door of the temple and passing to the right of the altar on its south side. The man brought me outside the wall through the north gateway and led me around to the eastern entrance. And there I could see the water flowing out through the south side of the east gateway. This was the gateway that the Lord had come in through. And the man took a measuring rod, and he measured 1,750 feet, 1,750 feet. And then he led Ezekiel across that river. He went a ways from the temple, measured this 1,750 feet. And then he had Ezekiel cross, and the water come up to his ankles. And then he measured another 1,750 feet and had Ezekiel cross back over, and it was up to his knees. And then he had him cross back over again after another 1,750 feet, and it was up to his chest. And then the next 1,750 feet, the water was so deep and so swift, he couldn't cross. So this was a river that started just like a little trickle that came from the temple of the Lord, from the eastern gateway. And this would be a river that would bring water to the whole area of Israel. And it flowed from the Lord, and it got wider and deeper the farther that it went, to make sure and take care of all the people. And he said, "Have you been watching me, son of man?" Then he brought him back to the riverbank. And he was surprised that there were trees growing on both sides of the river. And the man said to him, "This river flows east through the desert to the valley of the Dead Sea." Some of you might remember that when Lot was rescued from Gomorrah, he and his wife and his daughters, the angels told them not to look back. But Lot's wife looked back, and she was immediately turned into a pillar of salt. And it is said that this is exactly where the Dead Sea is. The Dead Sea is so salty, fish can't live in it. Now, scientists has realized there are organisms that live in the Dead Sea, but not fish like we know of that live in the ocean, which is salty, but not this salty. It's 17 times saltier than the ocean is. It is so salty you can't drink it. And if you get it in your eyes, it's going to make you feel like your eyes are put out. But this water in the Dead Sea is very healing because it has a lot of minerals in it. Actually, my husband and I soak in Dead Sea salts very, very frequently, usually every day. And I encourage my clients to also, because it makes muscles that are sore and achy not be achy anymore. God heals people with the things he has created. And even though this Dead Sea was formed because a woman was disobedient and looked back, this is what God says in his word is going to happen to that Dead Sea. The waters of this stream will make the salty waters of the Dead Sea fresh and pure. If you got in the Dead Sea right now, your body would just float to the surface. But once this happens, your body would sink just like it would in a regular lake or a river. It says there will be swarms of living things wherever the water of this river flows, and fish will abound in the Dead Sea, for its waters will become fresh. Life will flourish wherever this water flows. Fishermen will stand along the shores of the Dead Sea, and they will be drying their nets in the sun. And fish of every kind will fill the Dead Sea, just like they fill the Mediterranean Sea. But the marshes and the swamps around will not be purified. They will still be salty. But fruit trees of all kinds will grow along both sides of this river, and the leaves of these trees will never turn brown and fall, and there will always be fruit on their branches. Being here in the greenhouse, you can see all kinds of plants. I have all kinds of plants in the greenhouse here, and if I had not brought them in, they would have all been dead by now because their leaves would have turned brown and they would not have survived. But because I brought them in so that the weather would not be so cold, they're doing okay. I even have oranges and tangerines and kumquats growing in here, and limes and lemons. This is saying that there will be trees that their leaves will never turn brown and fall off, and they will constantly have fruit on them. I think that's really cool because they're not even having to be put in a greenhouse. And it said that they will be watered by this river, and there will be a new crop every month. And this river will flow from the temple, and the fruit will be good for food, and the leaves will be good for healing. I have some plants in here. This plant right here, you can't smell it, but oh, it has a very beautiful smell. It's called basil. And basil is really good for helping people that are sick. I have a lot of other herbs. In fact, my whole garden started out as herb gardens because different leaves, roots, and stems of different plants can heal colds and achy breaky fingers and cuts and bruises and when you have tummy upsets, because God created these plants. He created them to help us heal. They don't act as fast as prescription drugs. Prescription drugs that the doctors give you have been taken in a laboratory and molecularly cloned. They don't have God's love and direction in them, and they usually have side effects. And I really do not like drugs, but I really like healing my body and helping people understand what different herbs can help your body heal. And God says right here in his word, the leaves of his trees are for healing. Not all leaves. Some leaves are poisonous. But God put his love and direction in certain plants. And then they're here for us. The fruit is here for us to eat. I've got some kumquats back there. It's kind of difficult for me to get back there right now because I had to really squeeze in to get in here. I have so many plants in. God made boundaries for the land and borders for the land, and he gives the people all these different measurements of the borders. And he says one last thing. He says that the gates of the city are going to be renamed. And there's 12 gates, and those 12 gates, there's inner gates and there's outer gates of the temple, and they're going to be renamed for the 12 different tribes of Israel. God must really, really love Israel. He talks about it all the time. And even though Israel disobeys him and he has to bring nations against them to punish them, he always takes them back and loves them and tries to start all over again, teaching again. Isn't that just the way your parents do? You get in trouble and then they say, okay, this is your punishment. This is your consequence. We still love you. Now let's start all over again. Today is the very last day of 2020. And you probably will be listening to this several days after that. But I want to encourage you for this next year, 2021, to try to make it be a year that you purpose in your heart to read your Bible, to spend time praying with the Lord every day. Ask him about those blueprints on your fingertips. Ask him to show you what footsteps to walk in so that you can walk out your destiny. Nobody else can walk out your blueprints, your footprints, but you. Nobody can walk out your fingertips but you. And how are you going to know what they are unless you ask him? And you've got to spend some quiet time in prayer with him to be able to hear. And if you don't get the answer the first time you ask him, just keep asking. Maybe there's something in your mind that needs to shift and change so that you can hear. That is my prayer for you. In the name of Jesus, I pray that you hear clearly everything God has to say to you, and that this next coming year, 2021, or whenever you're listening to this teaching, would be the best year ever for you, because you would be walking in the footsteps that the Lord orders for you. Just like Ezra and Zerubbabel built that temple exactly the way that God told Ezekiel to build it. Ezekiel brought a message of judgment and restoration to the people of Israel. We have one more prophet that we're going to study, Malachi, and then we will be done with the Old Testament and we'll be starting the New Testament. I look forward to being with you next week and starting our exciting new study in Malachi, but I encourage you to be faithful to God. And when he tells you something, do it exactly. the way he tells you to do it, so that you will be able to be an instrument in his hand and accomplish his will here on earth. I love you all, and I'll see you next week.